One of the Bible's most stunning events happens near the end of the last book, in Revelation chapter 20, when after 1,000 years of Christ reigning on the earth as king, Satan is released from prison, let out to attempt to deceive the nations one last time. Many Christians living today, and many from throughout church history, have asked the question, why? Why after 1,000 years of a Satanless earth, after 1,000 years of peace, will the great serpent be released from the bottomless pit and empowered to deceive the nations for one last time? In order to answer this question, we need to go all the way back to the very beginning, where the story first started. What story am I talking about? Not the story of the book of Revelation, the story of the entire Bible. The story begins in a garden, paradise, actually. Genesis 2:8 tells us that after God had finished creating the heavens and the earth, he formed a man out of the dust of the ground. He placed the man in the Garden of Eden, but soon realized that the man would, like all the other created beings, require a companion. After putting the man to sleep, the Lord brought forth from the man a woman and placed her in paradise along with the man. Both the man and his bride were in the Garden of Eden, in the presence of God and of one another. They were told to be fruitful and to multiply, to fill the earth as God's image bearers, and to subdue it. As you well know, this is where the story deviates from the expected course. The ancient serpent, the one who we're told in Revelation chapter 20, verse 2, is the devil. Satan himself was also found to be in the garden. Now let's be clear about one thing. We have no idea why the serpent was given access to God's perfect and spotless image bearers. We also have no idea how long the man and his bride were living in the garden before Eve encountered the wily serpent. All we know is that he was there, and at some point, their paths crossed. When that encounter took place, the serpent convinced the woman to do the one thing she had been told not to do: eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. What happens next is one of the saddest yet most important events in the story. I say that it's important because if you don't understand it, you will miss the beauty of how this story eventually plays out. The man who as God's image bearer was called to love, defend, and cover his spotless bride. The man who just before had proudly and lovingly declared, "This at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh." That man failed to perform his most important duty. Not only did Adam fail to cover his wife, not only did he leave her vulnerable while seemingly going passive at the serpent's offer, but he also followed her by committing the same act of disobedience that she had committed. When it was all said and done, and the man was called to answer to his maker for what he had done, he blamed his sin on the woman. Let's recap. The story of Scripture begins with a spotless bride and groom living in paradise. They are immersed in the presence of God, in love with one another, completely and totally sustained and satisfied in every way. They walk with God moment by moment and exercise their God-given dominion at every turn. For them, God is all in all, and they are his perfect image bearers. Then, the serpent enters the picture, and temptation and sin soon follow. These eventually lead to death. It's the bride who is deceived and tricked into forsaking their perfect existence. But it is the bridegroom who fails to cover and redeem his perfectly fitted, yet vulnerable bride. With this context in view, let us now return to the 20th chapter of Revelation and see if we can make sense of how the story ends. In Revelation 19, we witness the second coming of Jesus. He is the rider on the white horse, the one who has come to defeat and conquer all who have opposed and persecuted his beloved church. Right before the rider on the white horse appears, we're also told something very, very important about his coming. A great multitude cries out with a voice like the roar of many waters. The marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. It was granted her to clothe herself in white linen, bright and pure. Throughout the book of Revelation, the church, the bride of Christ, has been under siege. She has been persecuted, tormented, and martyred. We're told early in the book why this is happening. God is allowing the unrepentant world to store up wrath for his soon coming day of judgment. And in the process, he is preparing a spotless and pure bride for his son. Yes, in the book of Revelation, known to the early church as the Book of Martyrs, the church is purified and sanctified, made perfectly ready for her marriage to the bridegroom through suffering, much like her bridegroom previously suffered for her. Now that the bride has been made ready for her marriage to the bridegroom, the king returns with his resurrected saints. He defeats his enemies, binds and imprisons the dragon, his ultimate enemy, and is now ready to celebrate his marriage to the purified bride on a redeemed and restored earth, which, coincidentally, has also been waiting for the revealing of the purified sons and daughters of God. How long will this wedding feast last? The text doesn't say specifically, but it sure seems like the 1,000-year reign of Christ, mentioned multiple times in Revelation 20, coincides with the marriage feast that all of heaven has just declared is about to get underway. However, the next thing we read is that after this 1,000-year reign, the serpent must be released for a little while. Do you see now why this release of Satan, after a period of peace and marriage feasting between the bride and the bridegroom, is a necessary part of the story? Do you see why, after 1,000 years of the bride and the bridegroom living on a restored earth, doing nothing but enjoying God and celebrating their love for one another, the ancient serpent must be released for a short time? You see, like the first Adam, the last Adam will also be given the chance to enjoy a period of perfect peace with his spotless bride. Call it a honeymoon if you want, a time when the bride and bridegroom enjoy God's presence and one another without any worry of temptation or sin. However, just like in the garden, this honeymoon will eventually end. The serpent will come to tempt the bride once more, to try and deceive her into abandoning her perfect life with God and his son, her husband. Only this time, the bridegroom will not fail in his mission to safeguard and to cover his vulnerable bride. After 1,000 years of feasting and marital delight, the last Adam, Jesus, will be given the same chance to cover a spotless and perfect bride, the very bride he purchased, redeemed, and purified for himself. Unlike the first bridegroom, the last one will not fail. When the serpent comes to tempt and seduce his bride, he will not stand by aimlessly. Unlike the first Adam, the last one will remain faithful to God and to his bride. And the very act of disobedience that kicked off this whole crazy and awesome story will finally and completely be redeemed. The bride will be covered. The serpent will be thrown out of paradise and exterminated. The reason for his existence run out. The bride and the bridegroom will then enter the new paradise, the everlasting paradise, the Jerusalem that comes down from above, to live forever in perfect peace, with no possibility of sin, corruption, death, or heartache ever to be heard from again.